Okay, hello everyone, this is Mr. Elbronen here again, and in this video we're going to be explaining frame data for dummies. Because I understand that the terminology that people can use to talk about frame data, plus unblock, minus unblock, and a lot startup, can be a little bit confusing. But luckily, I don't even really need to be making this video, because you're playing a fighting game with the best, most coherent resource for understanding frame data out of any fighting game in the industry. And that is these two bars at the bottom of the screen. So in this video, I'm just going to help you understand these two bars at the bottom of the screen. And they flash up with, bright colors and a lot of numbers and a lot of little rectangles. So I'm going to explain what this means, because once you understand these two bars at the bottom, you're going to be able to figure out everything yourself and you become a frame data master and you don't need anyone to explain anything else to you. So let's just start by throwing a light punch. And as you can see, the bottom of the screen lit up with a few different colors here. And each of those little rectangles of different colors refers to one frame of in-game gameplay, because fighting games run at 60 frames per second. So one frame is 1/60th of a second. And everything your character does, everything you do will run frame by frame by frame. So if you have an attack that is 4 frames, it means it'll take 4/60ths of a second to connect. And this time talking is confusing, but the visual of the little rectangles makes it a lot more understandable. So when I throw this light punch, you can see there is 3 green, 3 red, and 7 blue rectangles. And they all refer to different aspects of your attack. It says startup 4 frames and total 13 frames. The different colors have different meanings as well. The green is the amount of frames it takes for an attack to start up. The red is how long the attack is active, and the blue is how long the attack recovers. And what these mean, I will explain. So a startup, how long it takes for an attack to start up, means how long does it take for the move to actually be able to hit your opponent. So something quick like a punch, as you can see, it only takes 4 frames for it to have these red active frames. And the active frames is when it can hit the opponent. So as you can see, it's really quick. It only takes 4/60ths of a second to hit Ken in the face. Whereas something slower like this has 19 or 20 startup frames. So you have to wait 20 60ths of a second for it to hit the opponent. So it's a lot slower startup. Basically, it just means if it's slow, if it's short startup, it's fast. If it's long startup, it's a slow attack. Now the red ones are how long an attack is active. And generally, you can see an attack is active for about 3 to 5 frames are normal things. And this just means how many frames is the opponent able to be hit by an attack. So a little punch of mine is only going to have 4 active frames, but if I do something like my backwards heavy kick, as you can see, it has 2 blocks of red because there's 2 different hits, so it kind of has more active frames, so there's more opportunity for the opponent to accidentally walk into it and get hit by it. As you can see, it hits the opponent twice, so there's 2 active frames where it can actively hit the opponent. And as you can see in my Tatsu here, it has 3 different blocks of active frames, so it has 3 different ways it can hit the opponent. If the first active frame chunk doesn't hit the opponent, the second one will. And if the first 2 don't hit, well then the third chunk of active frames will. So active frames just refer to when the attack can actually hit the opponent. And if an attack has a lot of active frames, like his flying kicks here have 9 active frames, so if you manage to hit the opponent with the end of the active frames of an attack, you can actually get things afterwards that you wouldn't have normally been able to get. So as you can see, that didn't hit on the first active frame. If it hit right in his face, you can see the yellow bricks under here refer to when the opponent is being stunned. So he got hit on the first active frame of the flying kick. But if I do it from farther away, it'll hit with not the first frame. If I time it, if I space it perfectly. As you can see there, it hit nearly at the end of the active frames. And that means that I can get connections off of it that I normally wouldn't have been able to. Like a heavy DP, because it connected so late, I had so much more advantage that I could go for a slow attack like my heavy Shoryuken. And then the blue bricks are your recovery frames, and that is how many frames or how much time it takes for you to be able to block or do anything after you do your attack. So as you can see, a little jab like this doesn't have too many of them, it only has 7. So it only takes me 7 frames after the attack hits to be able to block again. And this is particularly important if you're throwing out buttons and you miss them. See, if I try to throw out this medium kick here, and I miss it, I have to wait 18 frames before I can block. And that means if I miss it, and then Ken kicks me, he's gonna punish me because I'm not able to block. And he's hitting me within these blue frames, so it's a punish. Okay, so I have Ken set to do a low kick when he wakes up. As you can see, it takes 7 frames for it to start up, and then it hits me, and then he has 27 frames of recovery. So, if I block this attack that he does, I can hit him before he's able to block, and that means I get a punish counter. I'll get a full combo on him before he's able to block. So that's super powerful. So just to reiterate, a high startup means the attack will be slow, and a low startup means the attack will be fast. Short active frames means the attack doesn't have too many opportunities to hit the opponent, but long active frames mean it can hit the opponent late or hit them multiple times. And short recovery frames means that it's relatively safe because the opponent, you'll recover and they won't be able to attack you in time, but you have a lot of recovery frames. That means that the opponent is probably going to be able to punish you because you're recovering for so long before you can block. So those are the bricks that refer to your own actions, but there's also some bricks that refer to when you hit your opponent with your actions. So as you can see, if I hit him with a little jab here, the yellow bars refer to how much stun he has. So as soon as he gets hit by my active frames, the red bars, he gets put in 14 frames of stun. A better example is my standing medium punch. As you can see, when I hit him with the first active frame, he gets put in 22 frames of stun. And then when you take into consideration that I only have 11 frames of recovery, that means that I am plus 7 here. And the game actually does this calculation for you, and you can see recovery plus 7 frames. So I am recovering 7 frames before the opponent is, which means that I can actually hit the opponent with an attack that is 7 frames or faster. So that could be my standing light punch, my crouching light punch, my standing light kick, or even my crouching medium punch because it's 6 frames. So I can do my standing medium punch into my crouching medium punch, and as you can see there was no gap in the opponent's recovery. If I mistimed this and did the crouching medium punch a little late, as you can see, it didn't combo because his stun wore off, and I was too slow with my attack, and my active frames didn't hit while he was still in stun. That also means that if I try to do a slower button, like my roundhouse kick, it just won't work because my active frames start way after he is in stun. But stun does also mean when the opponent is on the floor. So I do this sweep, knock him onto the ground here. I have 23 frames of recovery, but he has 58 frames of stun from getting hit by this. But unfortunately, he's on the floor, and I can't extend a combo in that situation. If I have Ken set to block, obviously when your opponent blocks an attack, there will be less stun, because that's the point of blocking. You don't get hit, you are stunned less. So if he blocks this light punch, as you can see, I'm actually minus now, so it's actually his turn, because he recovers from his stun earlier than I recover from my blue frames of recovery. And if I do the same applies for my medium punch, we're actually very even on my crouching medium punch. If I do this kick, I'm +1. If I do that, he recovers 2 frames earlier. If I do this, he recovers 6 frames earlier than me, so I'm very, very not at an advantage after he blocks that. But a lot of characters will have moves that are plus on block. So as you can see, this move, his solar plexus, has enough stun that even on block, I recover before he recovers from his stun, and I'm +1 on block, which means I can attack before he can attack me. So that means I can do a little poke to quickly beat him from trying to press anything, or I can just quickly grab him or something. But I'm plus, so it's my turn and I'm at advantage here. And that generally applies because it makes sense. It takes 19 frames for this slow move to start up, so my reward is I'm actually recovering earlier than him and having the advantage. Jump-ins are also very plus on block because you recover basically as soon as you touch the ground. So he's still in stun and I land on the ground, and I'm actually +8 here. So I can do an 8 frame, or like I can do this 6 frame medium punch, and there's nothing he can do about it. He has to block this. So generally, if your move has low recovery or a lot of stun, that means it'll be plus on block. Like this solar plexus just has a lot of stun, and that's why it's plus on block. And not only, obviously, if moves can have a lot of stun and little recovery that they can be plus on block, there will be other moves that have a lot of recovery and not much stun on block. And an obvious example of that is going to be your invincible anti-air wake-up DPs. they have a lot of recovery, and as you can see, Ken is only stunned for 22 frames, and I have 52 frames of recovery, so I'm minus 40 here. So I'm certainly not plus, and it's certainly not my advantage or my turn. So Ken can actually attack 40 frames before I can even block. So he can do a super slow attack. He could even punish me with something as slow as this, or a big slow kick. He doesn't need to do a quick little attack to punish me, because I'm so minus here that I am super punishable. So now you should understand the basic concepts of startup, active frames, and recovery frames, and also stun frames, whether it's on block or on hit, and how if there's a lot of recovery, you'll be punishable, and how if there's a lot of stun, you'll probably be plus on block. And so if you're plus, it means it's your turn. If you're minus, it means that it's their turn. And you can also say it's your advantage or your turn. And you should also understand how it works for combos. So when you link things together, you can realize, oh, well, if this is +7 and I have a 6 frame move, well, then I can link these together and this will connect as a combo. And that also applies on block. If I have something that is so plus on block, like this jump in is +8 or 10, then this is a true block string into a button like this, because there's no gap in his stun, so he can't go for a DP or anything. So that is like a combo on block, basically. So now that you generally get those concepts, let's quickly talk about some of the other colors you might see on here. The bright blue ones, as you can see, are from my dash. It just shows your dash frames, which is handy because it shows you how advantageous you are if you do a dash in after something. So if I end my combo in this DP and go for a dash in, as you can see, I'm +9. And it takes into account the dash as part of the knockdown as well. Because you can see my dash recovers before he recovers from his stun, so I'm still at advantage. And it's still my turn, even after I do the dash in. But if I did that if I did 2 dashes after something like this, as you can see, I'm -3 because my dashing just took too long and he recovered earlier than I did. Blue also shows for your jump-ins, so if I tried to jump at my opponent after something, you can see I'm -10 because he recovered 10 frames before I landed on the ground. Fireballs also have some different colors, so you still got the green frames for how long it takes for the fireball to actually appear. So it takes 15 frames for this fireball to appear on the screen. And then depending on how far it travels, as you can see, it traveled for 32 frames before it made contact with him, it traveled for 23 frames, or it traveled for 1 frame because it hit him as soon as it came out. And then you can also see the recovery. When I'm this close to him, I've got 31 frames of recovery, and he was only stunned for 31 frames, so I'm slightly minus. But if I do it from over here, I have my recovery is combined into these orange frames of traveling, and he gets stunned a lot later, so I'm a lot more plus. Obviously, I'm +23 because it hits so late. It's obvious that I can move before he can. These white frames, like the white with the lines in them, just means you are invincible, and it usually happens when you're in an animation. So like during the animation of my throw, I'm invincible, because it's just an animation, nothing can hit me. But it also means when you go for something like your invincible DP, you can see that it has 5 frames of invincibility before it hits the opponent. When Jamie has his spin kick special move, you can see there's these orange stripy bars, and they refer to projectile invincibility. So it's got a lot of frames of projectile invincibility, so as you can see, if you can't do it, it only lasts for 15 frames, so it's not the entire special move. But if he's knocked down and a projectile's about to hit me, I can do this, and I'll just go straight through them, because I've got 15 frames of that projectile invincibility. So I can just roll straight through it while I have those invincibility frames on. But only to projectiles. If you do a drive impact, you can see a different color. You can see purple frames. And those frames refer to armor. So your drive impact has 25 frames where it has armor on it. So Ken tries to hit me with anything, including his fireball. As you can see, it hit on like after the 26th frame, but I had armor, I went through it, and then he got hit by the big drive impact punish splash. And now that we know what those are, that's basically all you need to know when it comes to what these bars on the bottom of the screen means. Just as a little bit of other, terminology, general knowledge, when people talk about something being reactable, they're referring to how slow it is. And if they're talking about mix-ups, it's generally accepted that if you're just reacting, like the opponent is attacking you and you think they're going to go for a low or an overhead, generally about 20 frames is considered reactable. But it's tough, don't worry, I find it hard too. The average person is probably more like 25 or 30 frames, but if you're really looking for it, a 22 frame overhead should be reactable, so you can block it overhead in time. But if something is like 7 frames, you certainly cannot react to that. So if he had a 7-frame overhead and a 7-frame row, that would be considered unreactable. And in terms of reactability in neutral, because there's a lot more that can happen in neutral and it's not just blocking low or blocking overhead, things usually need to be around the 25 to 30 frames to be considered reactable, which is why drive impact is a bit challenging for some people, because generally they're about 25 frames of startup. So you have to be really pushing and your reactions and looking for it to react to this drive impact, because anything can be happening and you need to react within basically under half of a second and press your own drive impact button, or else you'll get hit by it. So attacks in neutral that are under 20 frames or under 25 frames are generally considered unreactable. That's why some characters that have really quick dash-ins into throws, some people call that an unreactable approach, because it's just so quick that even though technically, yeah, you can see it happening, it's really hard to react and act appropriately. Things like jump-ins, see, it's a total of 45 frames for that jump into an attack. So that is what people would consider reactable. And that's why a lot of people can react to people jumping in, and they go for like a DP anti-air or something to hit them out of the air, because they can react to you flying over the sky towards them. See, neutral, something that the opponent could react to is me going for my drink, because that's 50 frames. They can see me starting that, and they can probably drive rush up and punish me. So I have to be very careful about doing that. They could even possibly react to me doing this palm strike, because all they have to do is react and block. And 25 frames just to block in any direction is pretty doable. But something like this crouching medium kick, because if you're in this range, this crouching medium kick is unreactable. So the opponent will have to predict that it's coming out. They can't see, oh look, that kick is coming towards me and I have 7 frames to realize and block low. That just doesn't happen. So when you're playing in this range, basically anything the opponent does will be unreactable. Whether they walk up and go for a throw, walk up and go for a button, strike, throw, and that's why strike throw mix is considered so potent, because it's all about predicting what the opponent will do rather than actually reacting. Because you can't react to any of this stuff. Also, just quickly, another term that people use to talk about when it kind of has to do with frame data is a meaty attack. And that just means you hit an opponent right as they wake up, and you hit like the first frames that they're out of their stun. So if I knock them onto the ground with something like this throw, and you can kind of see there that as soon as he was out of his stun, I was a little bit slow there. There you go. So basically 4 frames after he woke up, I hit him with that attack. So it hit very meaty. It hit very close to as soon as he was out of his stun. Something that hits really meaty is Juri's projectile when she throws it out when the opponent is knocked down. So the opponent is in their stun, and as you can see, that projectile was on the screen, and it looks like their stun continued forever, but after this 101 frames, that's how much they were stunned from the spinning kick, and then they got instantly hit by the projectile, and they were stunned for another 33 frames. So that is something that is extremely meaty, because it hits them on the first possible frame that they're able to be hit. And in Street Fighter 6, the frame data of attacks can actually change depending on certain circumstances. So for example, if I do a drive rush into my button, that's plus 11 now, whereas usually it's only plus 7. So normally I can only link it into something like this. But if I do a drive rush, it becomes plus 11, so I can connect into my heavier buttons because it gets 4 extra frames of stun. So it stuns my opponent for longer, which means I can go for slower buttons and they will connect before the opponent recovers from their stun, which basically just always means you get more juicy combos. And this also means if the opponent is blocking, you get 4 extra frames of stun, where this is usually plus 2. I add the 4 frames of stun and it becomes plus 6. So now I'm really plus in their face and I can do, some sneaky mix. Maybe I would go for an overhead. That's not guaranteed. But now, going for my crouching medium punch actually is guaranteed and there's no gap at all, where there usually is a little bit of a gap where they could have gone for a super or a DP or something. Also, countering the opponent will give you 2 extra frames of stun, so it's usually plus 7, and if it gets a counter hit, it's plus 9, which means I can now combo it into my crouching medium kick, which is not something I can do before. And if I get a punish counter, so if I hit the opponent while they're in recovery, that's when you get a punish counter, it gets a total of 4 extra frames of stun, just like using a drive rush. So now, I can link into combos that I would have only been able to do off of a drive rush because I got a punish counter. And if you get a punish counter and a drive rush, well then it gets ridiculous and you get 8 extra frames of stun, and by that point you can just hit them with anything you like, really. Also, if your opponent is burnout, meaning they've ran out of their drive meter, you'll automatically get the +4 frames of stun when they block anything. So you don't even need to do a drive rush, and this automatically is already +6. If I do a drive rush, this is now +10. So your offense becomes extremely more potent when they are in burnout because you get extra stun on all of your blocked attacks. And just a final little piece of trivia, when you go for your parry, that doesn't actually change the frame data of your opponent's attack at all. If I do this, Ken's doing a little kick off me after I punched, and you can see he's -5 and I'm +5, so I can attack 5 frames before him, so I can actually punish it with a little poke. That doesn't change at all if I go for a parry. I'm still +5. All a parry does is make it so you can block overheads and lows without having to react. It doesn't change frame data or anything, it also makes it so your drive gauge doesn't get depleted. But that being said, there are also perfect parries, and if you parry right as the attack connects, clearly there's something special. And you get this massive slowdown, and you do actually recover a lot earlier, and you can punish practically anything, because you get the entire screen stops while you attack. I become +21 after his kick, where I'm usually +5, so I can get a lot bigger of a punish than I normally could have. But it's balanced by having really low damage. So now, I think we've been talking about frame data for long enough, but hopefully we've covered enough topics and enough terminology that you're basically a pro now, right? You understand what the startup is, you understand what active frames and recovery are, you understand when an opponent is blocking your attacks, whether you're minus or plus, and what that means. You understand like the duration, if something is slow, if something is fast. If you hit something meaty, you understand if something links, it's because they are stuck in stun. And parries don't change frame data. And drive rush and counters add extra stun to your attacks. So you can get extra block pressure and extra combos that you wouldn't have been able to get before. Anyways, that has been a really long video talking about frame data, but surely now you're pro. So I hope you learned something and I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in whatever's next. Bye.